The mail-order bride was deaf. The cowboy learned her language and said, "I love you." With his hands he whined, moved gently across the wide open land, bending the tall grass as if it were whispering secrets to the earth. Far away from busy towns and crowded streets, there stood a small wooden ranch house. It was simple, strong, and built with hands that knew hard work. This was where Ethan Miller lived. Ethan was not a man of many words. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet by nature. His days began before the sun even thought about rising. When the sky was still dark blue and the air felt cold, he would step outside, breathing in the fresh smell of earth and hay. His boots would press into the dirt as he walked toward the barn. The horses would lift their heads when they saw him. They trusted him. Animals often did. Life on the frontier was not easy. Fences broke in strong winds. Cattle wandered farther than they should. Storms arrived without warning, but Ethan never complained. He fixed what was broken. He worked until his muscles ached. He believed that a man's strength was shown not by loud talk, but by steady effort. Still, when evening came and the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, a different feeling would settle over him. He would sit on the wooden porch, hat resting on his knee, and watch the sky turn orange and pink. The land was beautiful, but it was also quiet, too quiet. Inside the house, there was only one plate on the table, one cup, one chair near the fire. The silence felt heavier at night. Ethan had once believed he did not need anyone. He had told himself that hard work and land were enough. But as the years passed, he began to understand something important. A man could own 100 acres and still feel empty inside. He wanted someone to share stories with, someone to laugh with, someone who would walk beside him through the fields and understand the long days without needing too many words. In the nearby town, he had seen families grow. He had watched children run down dusty roads, their laughter bright and free. He had noticed how other men smiled differently when they returned home. There was warmth waiting for them behind their doors. One winter night, as the wind shook the windows and the fire crackled low, Ethan made a decision that surprised even himself. He would no longer let loneliness choose his future. In those days, it was not unusual for men in the West to seek wives through letters. Women from far cities, sometimes from across the ocean, would answer advertisements placed in newspapers. They were brave women, willing to leave behind everything familiar to build new lives in unknown lands. Ethan did not rush. He thought carefully about what he would write. He did not promise riches. He did not pretend to be something he was not. His advertisement was honest and simple. He wrote that he owned a small ranch. He wrote that he valued kindness and hard work. He wrote that he wanted a partner, not a servant, a wife, not a stranger. After sending the letter to the newspaper office, he returned to his daily routine. At first, he wondered if anyone would answer. Weeks passed, then months. Life continued as it always had, early mornings, long afternoons, quiet evenings. One spring morning, as he returned from town with supplies, the postmaster handed him an envelope. "This one's for you," the postmaster said with a curious look. Ethan held the letter carefully. The handwriting on the front was neat and steady. It came from a distant city he had never visited. His heart beat faster as he rode back home. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he sat at the small kitchen table and stared at it for a moment. This letter could change everything. Finally, he broke the seal. The letter inside was written by a woman named Clara Bennett. Her words were calm and thoughtful. She wrote that she had read his advertisement several times before deciding to respond. She appreciated his honesty. She said she was not afraid of farm life and had grown up helping her family with work. She believed in respect and partnership. She wanted a home where she would be valued. Ethan read every line slowly. Then he reached a sentence that made him pause. She wrote that she had been born deaf. He read that sentence again and again. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. He had never known anyone who could not hear. He tried to imagine what her world must be like. No sound of wind, no music, no voices calling from across a room. He wondered how they would speak to each other. How would they solve problems? How would they share their thoughts? For a brief moment, doubt entered his mind. It would be easier, he thought, to choose someone whose world was like his own. But then another thought followed. Clara had written with such strength and dignity. She had not asked for pity. She had not hidden who she was. She had been honest from the start. And wasn't that what he wanted? Honesty, courage, a partner who faced life without fear. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. That night, as he sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one, he made his choice. He would write back. In his reply, he thanked her for her honesty. He told her he admired her courage. He admitted that he did not know sign language, but he was willing to learn. He wrote that if she was still willing, he would be honored to welcome her to his ranch. When he sent the letter, he felt both nervous and hopeful. Weeks later, another envelope arrived. She had agreed. The days before her arrival felt longer than any before. Ethan repaired loose boards on the house. He cleaned the spare bedroom. He bought small curtains from town and placed fresh flowers in a jar on the table. He was not used to preparing for company, especially not for someone who would soon be his wife. When the day finally came, he rode into town early and waited at the small wooden train station. The platform was quiet except for a few travelers and a man loading crates. The sound of the approaching train echoed in the distance. Smoke rose against the sky. Ethan's hands felt slightly unsteady, though he tried not to show it. The train slowed with a loud hiss of steam. Doors opened. Passengers stepped down one by one. Then he saw her. Clara Bennett stepped onto the platform holding a single suitcase. She wore a simple dress and a hat that shaded her face. Her movements were calm, not rushed. She looked around carefully, taking in her new surroundings. Ethan removed his hat as he walked toward her. "Miss Bennett," he said gently. She did not react. He remembered. For a second he felt foolish for forgetting. He tried speaking again, slightly louder, but then realized that would not change anything. Clara noticed him watching her. She studied his face, perhaps recognizing him from the small photograph he had sent. She stepped closer and gave a polite nod. Ethan felt unsure of what to do next. Words had always been simple for him. Now they felt useless. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook and pencil. She handed it to him with steady hands. On the page, she wrote, "Are you Ethan?" Her handwriting was clear. He nodded quickly and wrote back, "Yes, welcome to your new home." She read his words and smiled. It was not a wide or dramatic smile. It was soft and sincere. But in that moment, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The fear he had carried quietly for weeks began to fade. He picked up her suitcase and gestured toward his horse and wagon. She followed without hesitation. As they rode away from the station, the land stretched wide before them. Clara watched everything carefully, the fields, the sky, the distant hills. She seemed thoughtful, not frightened. Ethan glanced at her more than once during the ride. He wondered what she was thinking. Was she regretting her decision? Was she nervous? When they reached the ranch, she stepped down and stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The house was small but sturdy. The barn stood strong behind it. The fields moved gently in the wind. She turned to him. Then she placed her hand lightly against her chest and smiled again. Though no sound filled the air, Ethan understood something simple and clear. She was ready to begin. And so was he. Their marriage did not begin with spoken promises inside a crowded church. There was no music playing, no loud celebration. It began with ink on paper, steady hands, and two strangers choosing courage over fear. As the sun set behind the ranch that evening, casting golden light across the fields, Ethan realized that his life had already changed. The house was no longer just a building. It was the beginning of a shared story, and though silence surrounded them, it no longer felt heavy. It felt full of possibility. The first days after Clara arrived at the ranch were filled with new routines and small discoveries. The house, though simple, began to feel alive. Clara moved carefully, arranging her few belongings in the bedroom and placing fresh linens on the bed. She cleaned the floors until the wooden boards shone faintly under the sunlight that poured through the windows. Every detail mattered to her, and Ethan noticed. He had not expected someone to bring such care into his home, but it made the house feel warmer, more like a home. At first, communication was slow and often frustrating. Ethan would speak without thinking, then stop mid-sentence when he remembered she could not hear him. Clara would watch his lips carefully, trying to understand, sometimes nodding, sometimes frowning with confusion. They used the notebook most of the time. It sat on the kitchen table, always ready. Messages were short at first. "Dinner is ready. I fixed the fence. Do you need help?" These sentences, simple as they were, began to bridge the gap between them. But even with the notebook, something felt missing. Clara was polite and patient, yet Ethan could sense the weight of silence around her. She had left her family, her friends, and everything familiar to come to this remote ranch. She had left behind the hum of city streets and the chatter of people, replacing it with a world filled with quiet and wind. Ethan realized that although she had agreed to this life, it might still be lonely. One evening, after a long day of work, Ethan returned to the house and found Clara sitting by the window. The light of the setting sun touched her face, making her eyes shine with a strange mixture of hope and sadness. Ethan watched her silently for a moment. He felt an ache in his chest. He wanted to reach out to comfort her, to show her that she was not alone, but he did not know how. That night he sat by the fire thinking. He understood that words alone were not enough. He needed to learn her language. He wanted to communicate without relying only on writing. He wanted to see the world through her eyes, to share thoughts and feelings in a way that was natural and immediate. And so, he made a decision. He would learn sign language. The next morning, he traveled to the nearest town, seeking help. After asking several people, he found a small, old book that contained drawings of hands forming letters and simple words. The book was worn, pages yellowed, edges frayed, but it contained everything he needed. That night he began studying. At first his hands felt clumsy, the letters seemed awkward and slow. Sometimes he mixed them up, forming words that made no sense. Frustration bubbled up inside him, but he did not give up. He kept practicing until his fingers ached. Days turned into weeks. Every evening after chores were done, Ethan would sit at the table with the book and practice. Clara watched him quietly. She did not say much at first, but when she saw his effort, a small smile appeared on her face. She understood that this was his way of reaching out, of saying, "I want to understand you. I want to be with you." One evening, he finally felt ready to try. He approached Clara in the kitchen where she was kneading dough for bread. His hands trembled slightly. He raised them slowly and formed a simple word he had practiced many times. "Good!" Clara froze, her eyes widening with surprise. She looked at him carefully, then back at the dough, and realized what he was saying. She responded with a small motion of her hands, signing back. "Yes!" Ethan's heart raced. This was the first real conversation they had without the notebook. For the first time, words were no longer needed. They could speak directly through their hands. From that moment, their evenings became lessons. Clara patiently taught him new signs, correcting him gently when he made mistakes. Sometimes he would form a word incorrectly, and she would laugh softly, covering her mouth with one hand. Her laughter was silent, but it filled the room with warmth. Ethan learned quickly that silence was not empty, it was peaceful. It allowed him to notice details he had ignored before, the way sunlight fell on the floor, the expression in Clara's eyes, the small movements of her fingers that carried meaning. Through the new language, Clara shared her memories with him. She told him about her childhood, about the challenges she had faced growing up deaf, and how people often underestimated her. She spoke of the kindness she had found in unexpected places and the strength she had learned to carry within herself. Ethan listened with admiration. He realized that she was not just learning his world, he was learning hers. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They worked together on the ranch, signaling to each other as they tended the animals and repaired fences. Every small gesture became a conversation. A hand pointing, a finger tracing a line, a gentle tap on the shoulder, all carried meaning. The house, once quiet, now buzzed with movement and connection, even without sound. In town, some people stared when they saw them communicating with their hands. Some whispered, curious or confused, but Ethan stood tall beside Clara. He made sure others spoke clearly and faced her when addressing her. If someone mocked her silence, he responded firmly, protecting her with quiet strength. Together, they created a world where Clara's silence was not a weakness, but a way of understanding the world differently. Seasons changed. Spring brought green grass and flowers that Clara carefully planted around the house. Summer filled the fields with cattle and hay. Autumn painted the land in warm golds and reds, and winter covered everything in white snow. Throughout it all, their routine remained. Work during the day, study and practice at night, small gestures and signs that grew more confident each day. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, they sat by the fire, side by side. Clara rested her head lightly against Ethan's shoulder, and he felt a warmth that no words could describe. He had practiced a sentence for weeks, carefully crafting it in his mind. Slowly, carefully, he moved his hands so she could see clearly. "I love you." Clara's eyes widened, and tears filled them, not from sadness, but from something deeper. She reached forward and signed back with grace and certainty. "I love you too." For the first time, they spoke freely, fully, and without sound. Their love, built on effort and understanding, had begun to grow in a way that neither had expected. The silence was no longer lonely. It was filled with connection, patience, and shared discovery. From that day forward, they continued to build their lives together, one sign at a time. Each new word learned, each gesture understood, brought them closer. They realized that love did not need sound. It only required attention, care, and the willingness to reach across the gap between two different worlds. After that first evening when Ethan told Clara, "I love you," with his hands, life on the ranch began to take on a new rhythm. The house and land were no longer just work and chores. They had become a shared space where trust, patience, and small joys grew every day. Every task, from feeding the animals to repairing fences, became a chance for them to communicate in a way that felt natural and real. With each passing day, Ethan's confidence in using sign language grew, and Clara's patience and warmth made him feel welcomed into her world, as if their lives had always been meant to meet. Clara taught Ethan more than words and letters. She taught him how to notice the details that he had ignored before. The way the wind shifted in the tall grass, how the clouds moved across the vast prairie, or the subtle changes in the horses, behavior that hinted at the weather. For Clara, the world was full of signs, not sounds, and she helped Ethan see it too. He realized that she had a gift for observation, for understanding the world without needing anyone to explain it. It was a skill that made her quiet strength even more admirable. One afternoon, Ethan found her near the barn, carefully brushing down one of the horses. She moved with calm precision, her hands guiding the horse gently. He stood a few steps away, admiring her patience and attention. Without thinking, he signed slowly, "The horse trusts you." Clara looked at him, her eyes lighting up, and signed back, "I feel safe here." That moment, small and silent, carried more meaning than 1,000 spoken words. Ethan realized that the language they shared was more than letters. It was understanding, it was trust, it was love. Work on the ranch could be grueling, but together they found joy in the labor. When fences needed repairing, they worked side by side. Ethan would lift the heavy boards, and Clara would help secure them with careful precision. Sometimes they would gesture back and forth, signaling what to pass, where to place a nail, or how to adjust a plank. Their hands became tools not just of work, but of connection. The work was no longer a solitary struggle. It was a shared dance of effort and understanding. Evenings were reserved for learning and play. Clara began teaching Ethan new words, new signs, not just for daily needs, but for the small joys and pleasures of life. Words for laughter, happiness, the gentle feeling of a breeze, or the warmth of the sun on one's face. They would sit near the fire with the notebook at first, then slowly, as Ethan became more fluent, they used only their hands. Sometimes he signed a word incorrectly, and Clara would giggle softly, her fingers dancing lightly in correction. The laughter, though silent, filled the room with a warmth that words could never match. Beyond the ranch, their presence in the small town began to draw attention. People stared at them at first, confused by the silent conversations and hand gestures. Some whispered, questioning what it all meant. But Ethan and Clara did not let the stares disturb them. Ethan would gently guide anyone trying to speak to Clara to face her directly and speak clearly. If anyone treated her unkindly, he stood firm, shielding her not with anger but with quiet dignity. Clara, for her part, remained graceful, never showing fear, only patience and understanding. Their courage, their bond, slowly began to earn respect from the community. Seasons changed as they did. Spring brought green grass and wildflowers that Clara carefully tended, planting them along the edges of the house. Summer brought long, hot days of work and the sound of insects buzzing in the heat. Autumn painted the land in reds and golds, and winter covered the ranch in snow that glittered under the pale sun. Through it all, their life together was constant, grounded in small acts of care and shared understanding. One evening, after a long day of work, Ethan noticed Clara sitting by the window, her hands moving in gentle gestures that he had not yet learned. He watched, curious, and then moved closer. She smiled at him and slowly signed a story about her childhood. She described the city she had come from, the streets filled with noise and color, the people bustling past without noticing each other. Ethan listened, fascinated, even though he could not hear her past life. He felt grateful that she was sharing it with him, grateful that she trusted him with her memories. Ethan, in turn, began to share his past. Using signs and drawings, He told Clara about the ranch, the struggles he had faced alone, the nights he had spent wondering if he would ever have someone to share his life with. Clara's eyes softened with understanding, and she reached out, touching his hand gently to reassure him. These exchanges, though silent, created a depth of connection that words alone could not achieve. Their evenings often ended on the porch, where they watched the sun dip below the horizon. Sometimes no words were needed at all. Clara would rest her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he would wrap an arm around her, their hands occasionally meeting in silent conversation. The quiet of the prairie, once lonely and heavy, now felt peaceful, full of life and shared experience. Their love was not limited to the home. On trips to town, they moved together through streets full of curious eyes. Ethan would sign to Clara, guiding her safely through the crowd. People began to notice their closeness, their harmony, their respect for each other. Slowly, what had first been puzzling or even strange to onlookers became admirable. They saw that love could exist without sound, that understanding could grow in silence. Sometimes, when the work was done and the day was calm, Ethan would take Clara by the hands and sign small stories he had imagined, playful tales of animals, the wind, or stars. Clara would respond, creating her own gestures, weaving stories that made Ethan laugh silently, the sound caught only in his heart. These moments became the fabric of their shared life, simple yet profound. Challenges came, of course. Harsh weather tested the land and their endurance. Illness sometimes visited, making chores difficult. Yet, through every hardship, they faced each challenge together. Their language, built from patient effort, became a bridge not only for words, but for strength, encouragement, and comfort. Each day, they learned more about each other, discovering strengths and vulnerabilities, dreams and fears. As their skill in sign language grew, so did their understanding of the world through each other's eyes. Ethan learned to notice the subtle signs of weather in the clouds and animals, guided by Clara's careful teaching. Clara learned the rhythm of ranch life, the logic of work that required patience and timing, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done well. They were not simply living together. They were learning to see life from two perspectives, merging them into a single shared vision. Their bond strengthened with each passing year. Simple gestures, the touch of a hand, a glance across a room, a small smile, carried deep meaning. They no longer needed the notebook for most conversations. Their hands, their eyes, their shared understanding were enough. Love had become a language they both spoke fluently. Ethan often thought about the day Clara arrived at the train station, holding her small suitcase, stepping into the unknown. He realized how far they had come. From written words to silent gestures, from awkward attempts to fluent conversation, their journey had transformed them. They had built more than a home. They had built trust, patience, and a love that could endure anything. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the prairie. Sometimes they spoke with hands, sometimes with small drawings, and sometimes no words or signs were needed at all. Their connection was understood without effort. They had discovered a truth that few people understand, that love, patience, and understanding can speak louder than any sound, and that the heart has its own language, one that only those who truly listen can hear. Years passed on the small frontier ranch, and life continued in its quiet rhythm. Ethan and Clara grew older, but their love remained as fresh and vibrant as the first time he signed those 3 words. "I love you." Their hands, now slightly worn from years of work and weather, still carried the language they had built together. Each touch, each gesture told a story only they fully understood. The ranch, once empty and quiet, was now alive with warmth, trust, and the deep bond of a life shared fully. The town that once stared at them had come to admire them. People began to see something special in their silent conversations and careful gestures. They were not just a curiosity anymore. They were a lesson in patience, love, and understanding. Children would sometimes watch from a distance, fascinated by the movements of their hands. Clara, with her gentle nature, would patiently teach them simple signs, while Ethan guided them with quiet encouragement. Their home became known as a place of kindness, where anyone who came felt welcome and safe. On the ranch, work never stopped. The seasons brought their own challenges. Summers were hot, with sun beating down on the fields and cattle needing constant attention. Autumn brought storms and wind, bending the trees and testing the fences. Winters covered everything in snow, making every task heavier, slower, and more difficult. Yet, through all of it, Ethan and Clara worked side by side, their silent communication making the labor lighter and the moments together more meaningful. Ethan often marveled at Clara's ability to see the world differently. She noticed things he had missed for years, the way the clouds changed color before a storm, the slight twitch in a horse's ear that warned of danger, the softness in a calf's step that showed it was frightened. Her observations taught him patience, attention, and care. In turn, he showed her the rhythm of ranch life, the patterns in work, the need for strength and endurance, and the satisfaction of a day's labor completed well. Together, they built not just a home, but a life of shared understanding. Evenings on the porch became their favorite time. The sky would paint itself in shades of gold, pink, and purple. Ethan and Clara would sit side by side, sometimes holding hands, sometimes signing quietly to each other. They no longer needed the notebook that had once been their lifeline. Their gestures were fluent, their connection instinctive. A simple touch of a hand or a movement of a finger conveyed affection, concern, or joy more clearly than words ever could. They celebrated small joys in life together. Clara loved to plant flowers, and she taught Ethan the names of each one using signs. They would water the plants together, carefully watching each bud bloom. Ethan enjoyed teaching Clara new techniques for caring for the animals, showing her how to handle horses and cattle safely. Each new lesson brought laughter, gentle corrections, and moments of shared triumph. Life, in all its simplicity, became rich and full because they shared it fully with each other. Time also brought reflection. Ethan would often think back to the day Clara first stepped off the train, carrying only a small suitcase, brave enough to leave her familiar world behind. He remembered the fear he had first felt when he read her letter, fear of the unknown, of someone different, of a silence he did not understand. But he also remembered the courage that had replaced that fear and how much he had learned from it. Clara had changed his life not through grand gestures, but through patience, honesty, and determination. Clara, too, reflected on their journey. She had left behind the bustling city, her family and friends, trading it all for the quiet challenges of ranch life. At first, she had worried about loneliness, about the unknown. But Ethan had met her with respect and kindness. Together, they had learned a new way to communicate, a language of the heart. She realized that love was not about words spoken aloud. It was about effort, understanding, and choosing each other every day. Their love also extended beyond themselves. They taught the children in town small signs and gestures, helping them learn patience and empathy. They showed neighbors that differences were not something to fear or mock, but something to respect and understand. People who once whispered about them now sought their advice, admiring their resilience, their devotion, and the way they had built a life together that was strong, quiet, and full of care. Even as they aged, Ethan and Clara remained partners in every sense. They still worked on the ranch, though more slowly. Ethan's hands grew rougher and Clara's movements became gentler, yet they adapted together. When heavy work was required, they planned and executed it as a team, often laughing silently at the small mistakes or missteps that life presented. Each day was an opportunity to grow closer, to understand more, and to cherish what they had built. Winter evenings were the most special. Snow would cover the fields in a soft blanket, and the fire would crackle in the hearth. They would sit close, sharing stories with their hands, reminiscing about the past, and dreaming quietly about the future. Sometimes no signs were needed at all. They could communicate through a glance, a touch, or the comfort of simply being together. In those moments, the silence was not empty. It was full of love, trust, and shared history. Through all the challenges, storms, illness, long hours of labor, they remained devoted. They had learned to face life together, to support each other, and to communicate without words. Their hands told stories of joy, sorrow, and triumph. They understood each other in a way that only comes from years of patient effort and unwavering love. As their lives continued, they realized the depth of what they had built. They had taken a world that was once lonely and quiet and filled it with connection, understanding, and care. Their love was not loud or flashy, but steady, strong, and enduring. It was a love that did not need sound to be felt. On quiet evenings, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they would sit together on the porch, holding hands, watching the sky change colors. Sometimes they signed to each other, sometimes they simply watched the world in peaceful silence. They had discovered that love is measured not by words, but by effort, patience, and choice. They had chosen each other every day, for years, building a story that was richer than any spoken tale. The ranch, once only land and buildings, had become a symbol of their life together, a place where love, respect, and understanding grew. Travelers who passed by could sense the peace in the house, the strength in their partnership, and the quiet joy that filled their lives. Ethan and Clara had created a world where silence was not a barrier, but a bridge. Their journey had taught them that true love requires patience, learning, and mutual respect. It is not always easy, but it is always worth the effort. They had built more than a home. They had built a life filled with trust, warmth, and the unspoken promise that they would face every day together, no matter what challenges came their way. Even in old age, their hands remained the language of their hearts. A gentle touch, a small sign, a look across the room conveyed more than words ever could. And in that quiet, enduring connection, they found something far greater than speech. A love that spoke without sound, strong enough to last a lifetime, and gentle enough to fill the spaces between them with understanding and peace. And so, the ranch was no longer just land and buildings. It was a place where understanding and affection thrived. Every day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to communicate. And through it all, Ethan and Clara discovered a truth far greater than words, that the heart can speak loudly even when the world is silent. Their lives became intertwined not only through work and routine, but through the shared language of hands, the quiet patience of the heart, and the unspoken promise that they would face the world together, always.